This composition, Superfan Jazz, is by far the strongest comp in set 10. If you look at the stats, it has the highest pick rate and the highest average placement, meaning that despite being contested, it is still performing better than other compositions. And because of how strong it is, it might actually cause Mortdog, who has bet that there will be no B patches until the end of the year, to lose his bet, unfortunately. So what's the overall idea behind this comp? Well, you're looking to maximize the value of the Jazz trait, which gives you additional HP and damage for each active trait you have on your board. Now, the way that you get many traits active on your board is by playing 3 traded units, like Neeko, Lilia, Ekko, and Kennen. And then you add Jazz units in the backline here, add a Kaisa, and you have 7 traits active on level 7. Now, 7 traits is a very important number. We'll talk about why in a moment. But that means you have 14% additional HP and 7% additional damage. On top of that, you'll notice that there's not a single 4 or 5 cost on this board, which means that you can consistently hit this board by 4-1, making it one of the strongest boards to get through the mid game with, and also even in stage 5, even without MF3 Bard 3. Now, I mentioned that 7 traits is very important. Why is this? Well, if you look at this augment here, that's Jazz Baby, it is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest augment to ever get introduced into TFT with a 37% win rate. I've never seen an augment be higher than this, and a 3.52 average placement. Now, the way this augment works is that the more traits that you have active on your board, your Jazz champions will gain permanent bonuses. When you have 7 traits active, they'll start gaining AD and AP every single round, which effectively turns them into these unkillable machines if you scale them throughout the entirety of the game. So if you ever get this augment, it's an auto take. You force this comp every single time. That's what everybody's doing in high elo right now. But even without this augment, this is still the strongest comp in the game, which really just highlights how broken that augment really should be because it boosts the already strongest comp in the game. Now, the other thing of note is that because there's no 4 and 5 cost, this is a very cheap board that you can use to get through stage 4 and 5, go fast 9, and eventually transition into playing legendaries if you don't see a world in which you're going to be able to hit MF3. Now, I will note that there are a lot of games that MF3 is not possible because a lot of people know that this is the strongest comp in the game. So in the stage 5 and beyond portion of this guide, we'll talk about how you can transition this into more of a standard level 9 board later on in the game. Let's briefly talk about item priority before we get into the stage portions of the guide. There are 3 main units that you're looking to itemize: Misfortune, Bard, and then a tank of your choice. I find Ekko to be better than Neeko, but if you have Neeko early, then it's perfectly okay to itemize her instead. Now, I've also shown Kennen with some items here. Think of him as a utility item holder that you can put excess items onto, especially if you're looking to try to get a 3rd item onto Ekko. So Sunfire Cape, Even Shroud, Redemption, all good examples of something that you can throw onto Kennen, and he will usually survive thanks to the healing from Bard. So I've actually found as long as you second row this Kennen behind your main tank, he actually will spread these effects pretty reliably and stay alive for a pretty long period of time. So one note here in terms of what you can do if you get some of these utility-based items. Now, when it comes to the Misfortune build, there are 2 main things that you're looking to get. Number 1, an attack speed item, with Guinsoo's being the best, but there are some other substitutes here. So instead of Guinsoo's, you can go red buff, especially if you're missing anti-heal. You can also go the Gambler's Blade, which is an Ornn item, also very strong. But the main idea here is you need some attack speed on the Misfortune. You can also build her with just a bunch of bow items in general. So for example, this could be a GS. And even though you are missing a very high attack speed item, just the fact that you have a couple of different bow items with Last Whisper and GS can go a long way. However, I have found that it is a lot better to build attack speed items on Misfortune, at least one of them. For your second item here, it's usually going to be a Last Whisper, but in some rare instances where you have Even Shroud, it's okay for you to build a damage item here. And then this third item is DB because that's her Superfan item. And so even if you don't have her as your headliner, DB is a very good item in general, so I highly recommend considering it as an option on Misfortune. Otherwise, you're looking to have another damage item here. Could be something like IE, could be something like, so let's get IE in there. Could also be something like a Runons. You're just looking for a damage item in that third slot here. So again, main idea behind how you want to itemize Misfortune is you get one attack speed item, the best one being Guinsoo's, Gambler's Blade, and then maybe Red Buff. And then you want to have a damage item, and then ideally a Superfan item for the third item, or another damage item if you don't have her as your headliner. For Bard, you're looking for just mana gen. This is, I honestly think, the best build for Bard is having, if you have him as your headliner, he has Adaptive Helm as his item of choice. I actually think just building 2 more mana gen items on the Bard is the strongest build you can get, especially if he's your headliner, so you can just start stacking as many Doots as possible. The way that Bard's headliner effect works is that the more casts that he gets off, the more powerful his first ability is. You can read the effect if you want to, but the basic idea is it counts the number of times Bard has cast throughout the entirety of the game, and the more he casts, his first cast gets stronger and stronger. So mana gen is very strong here. The other thing is that just him casting more often means that he's going to be healing your frontline more, which is going to buy more time for the MF to stack up with her Rageblade. So Bard with a bunch of mana gen items is pretty good. You can also build AP onto him if those are your main options. So if you wanted to, you could go ahead and put a JG onto Bard. So I'll go ahead and show that real quick. You could put a JG onto him. You could put a Rabadon onto him. You could put an Archangel onto him. So any of the AP items are perfectly acceptable as well. But generally speaking, I have found mana gen to be the best. And those are the main units that you're looking to itemize and the priority in which you should itemize them. I guess one last thing to note here is I find that MF items and tank items are more important than Bard, unless Bard is your headliner. So if you are looking for what you should be getting off of your carousel, I think Rageblade plus Last Whisper on MF are very high priority. She performs a lot better with both of them. And then you want to build tank items for your Ekko or Nico. And then lastly, you prioritize Bard. There are 3 main things to pay attention to in Stage 1. Number 1, what 1-cost headliner should you be looking to pick up from shop? Number 2, what 1 and 2-cost units should you be looking to pick up in shop aside from your headliner? And number 3, what 3-cost should you be looking to hold on to if you get any from your opening orbs or from the 3-cost champion start portal? We're going to go through each one of these one by one, starting off with your headliners. So your best headliner options, you have 4 of them. It's Kennen, Lilia, Evelynn, and Corki. Now, Kennen and Lilia are straightforward and easy to understand since they are part of the final board. They are also just generally the strongest headliners in the game right now, so you should pretty much always play around them in your opener. Evelynn is a good headliner to pair with Lilia, especially if you have KDA Evelynn. And then Corki is a strong backline AD unit that can item hold until you're able to transition into either Kai'Sa or Misfortune. Now you'll note that there's only 4 different headliner options here, but 13 different 1-costs, which means on average you are not going to find one of these 4 before Stage 2, and that's perfectly okay. I have found that most of the time it is better to greed for a good headliner than it is to take a suboptimal headliner that really doesn't make your board that much stronger, but requires gold investment and takes away from your option of seeing other headliners. So usually you're going to end up with one of these 4. Now, what other units should you be looking to pick up from shop from the 1 and 2 cost? Well, of course, you can pick up another big shot here to pair with Corki, being Kai'Sa, very strong unit to play early here. You can also be looking to pick up other units to pair with your frontline. So you can look at Guardians such as Taric and Pantheon. You can look at Sentinels such as Cassante and Garen. Garen being a little bit more interesting if you have Corki on your board. You can also look up to pick another Superfan here. So that would be Gnar. And then in the back line, you have a couple of different options here. So you can go with rapid fire units. This would be your Jinx, Aphelios, and Senna. One note I will make is that Senna is a very good unit to pair with Kennen, since true damage is very strong on Kennen. His bling bonus is quite good, where he will stun a second target. This is especially important if you have a headliner Kennen, or even just a 2-star Kennen in general. So just note that the Senna unit is pretty high priority in those cases. You can also play Dazzlers in the backline. This is much weaker. I generally do not recommend playing Nami plus Bard as your early game backline. They just don't kill that many units, but in some cases it's all you have. And then you can also play Spellweavers in the backline, but this is really only an option if you're able to get an Ekko from your opening orb. So let's go ahead and get into those 3 costs. What are the different 3 costs that you're looking to hold on to here? So these are your main options. You have a Mumu, Ekko, Misfortune, Mordekaiser, and Nico. Now, Ekko, Misfortune, and Nico are part of the final board. You're always going to hold on to those. Amumu and Mordekaiser are more situational, and you're only going to hold on to them sometimes. Otherwise, they cost too much gold to hold on to. The overall idea behind all of the different units that I have listed here is that you are looking to play a mixture of 2 frontline units and 2 backline units on level 4. And you want those 2 frontliners to share a trait, and you want the 2 backliners to share a trait. So ideally, you're playing 2 Sentinels or 2 Guardians with either big shots, rapid fires, dazzlers, or spellweavers. That's the basic premise of how this is set up here. Now, I've ranked these basically in order of importance when it comes to your backline. So your big shot units are the best, followed by your rapid fire units. And then there's a huge drop off when it comes to dazzlers, and spellweavers can be pretty good, but only if you have Ekko. So this is the most situational circumstance. And that's it for stage 1. These are the units you're looking to pick up. These are the headliners you're looking to get. And these are the 3 costs that you're actually hoping to hold on to. All right, so we are in stage 2, and this is the ideal level 5 board. You're not going to have it most of the time, and that's perfectly okay. I recommend checking out the end of the stage 1 portion of the guide if you skip to here to see many different frontline and backline options. One thing I want to note, at the end of stage 1 on 1-4, this is the last round, you can consider pre-leveling to 4. What does this mean? You press the level up button once, and then you let yourself natural into level 4 on 2-1. Why would you want to do this? If you were not able to find a headliner, remember there was 4 main different options for stage 1, which was Kennen, Lilia, Evelynn, and Corki. If you were not able to find one of these 4, if you pre-level going into 2-1, you're going to be level 4 and have a chance at different 2-cost headliners. Now, you don't always want to do this even if you didn't find one of these 4, particularly in the case where you have units that you want to hold on to bench and you simply cannot afford to pre-level. But if you can and you don't have units that you need to hold on to, I would highly recommend considering it because there's a lot of different 2-cost headliners compared to the 1-cost category. So different 2-cost headliners that you can consider are Aphelios, Bard, Garen, Gnar, Kai'Sa, Pantheon, and Senna. So you'll note that there are 7 different options in the 2-cost category, while there are only 4 different options in the 1-cost category. So getting to level 4 on 2-1 sometimes can lead you to get a very strong advantage, and you're a lot more flexible in terms of different headliners that you can get when it comes to the 2-cost. Now, for the same reason, you might want to consider pre-leveling on 2-3. So on 2-3, normally you natural into level 4, but if you already pumped 4 gold to get to level 4 on 2-1, then it's only 4 gold to pre-level to 5 on 2-3, and then you might be able to get even higher odds on 2-5 because you'll be level 5 and you'll have even higher chances of a 2-cost headliner. Hopefully that makes sense. I understand this is a little bit different from the way TFT has been played in the past. You almost never pre-leveled it going into 2-1. Sometimes you would pre-level on 2-3, but being able to have a higher chance at these 2-cost headliners is very valuable. Now let's talk about the idea behind when you should buy different headliners. I've sort of separated these headliners into different categories here. So in the bottom left, we have AD carries. We have AP carries in the middle. We have tanks here, and then Gnar can function as a tank even though he's a melee carry. What you're looking to do with a headliner is you are looking to fill in gaps in your team. So if you already have an upgraded backline unit, for example, let's say you have a Corki 2 non-headliner in your backline, then you might want to put a higher level of priority on finding a Garen or a Pantheon, or maybe a Lilia or Kennen for your frontline to be able to fill in the gaps in your team. So if you're missing frontline, then you want a frontline headliner. If you're missing backline, then you want a backline headliner. If you have neither, then of course you should be pretty flexible about whichever one you're able to get first. So I just want to note that, of course, this is not a hard rule of thumb. For example, if you have a Kai'Sa 2 and you get a Kai'Sa headliner chosen, even if you are lacking frontline, just having 2 Kai'Sa 2s in stage 2 is probably enough to win most fights. So I'm not saying this is a hard rule, but it is one that I have found has saved me a lot of HP in stage 2. The other thing of note here when it comes to stage 2 is what are you looking for off of the carousel? So the main thing of note, and I think I mentioned this in the item priority portion of the guide, is you are looking to build Misfortune and Frontline items roughly equally. You should also put a pretty high level of emphasis on finding some of the units that are part of the final board. So for example, if you see a Nico on carousel, that's pretty high priority. If you see a Misfortune on carousel, that's high priority. And if you see an Ekko on carousel, that is also high priority. So make sure that you're keeping an eye out for those 3 costs, and you should pretty much always go for them if they have any item that you can conceivably use. And that's it for Stage 2. In Stage 3, you are still looking to play flexibly to survive until 4-1, where you can actually force the perfect level 7 board. But before Stage 4, you're not going to be able to reliably force the perfect board. So you're not going to have this level 6 board with every single perfect synergy every single game. And so the main idea with how you want to put together your board is you're looking to play 3 Superfan and then a headliner that fills in the gaps for your comp. I mentioned this in the Stage 2 portion of the guide. So if you already have good backline, then you're looking for a frontline headliner. If you have a good frontline, then you're looking for a backline headliner. Another thing of note here is that once you get into Stage 3, specifically 3-2, if you're still running a 1-cost headliner, for example, Corki, Evelyn, or Lilia, Kennen, if you don't find that you are stable, there are some rare instances where Kennen and Corki can still be stable in Stage 3, then you might want to consider selling your headliner and then rolling on 3-2 until you're able to find a good 2-cost or 3-cost headliner. So to reiterate, what are the good 2-cost headliners? We have Aphelios, Bard, Garen, Gnar, Kai'Sa, Pantheon, and Senna. All right, so all of these are very acceptable carries or all acceptable headliners in Stage 3. And then now you can also, when you level up to 6 on 3-2, you can roll for a 3-cost headliner. Now the odds are pretty low on level 6. You should not be looking to force this. So most of the time, you're actually going to be running a 2-cost headliner. They're also more cost effective in most instances. For example, Kai'Sa, Senna, and Aphelios are all very strong for the amount of gold that it takes to purchase them. So generally speaking, I will settle for any of these different 2-cost, but if during your roll down you're able to find a good 3-cost, you might want to consider picking that up. Some examples include Ekko, Lulu if you have good Bard items, Misfortune of course, which is always an auto take, Mordekaiser, Nico, and sometimes Samira, but most of the times not. So really your best options here is just Misfortune. You'll notice that when it comes to the 3-cost category, your alternative options when it comes to Lulu and Samira for the backline, honestly, I think are less flexible than Aphelios, Senna, and Kai'Sa were. So you're usually going to end up with a 2-cost, but in some instances, you'll end up with a 3-cost. And if you get a Misfortune, you're high rolling. But remember the rule of thumb. 3 Superfan, fill in the gaps with your headliner. You do not want to run a 1-cost headliner in Stage 3 most of the time, with the exception being Kennen and Corki. Sometimes these are good enough for Stage 3 if the rest of your board is upgraded enough. And that's a judgment call that you're just going to have to get better with as you play more Set 10. Another thing of note here is that in some games, you will be rich enough to go level 7 on 3-5. If you are rich enough to go level 7 on 3-5 and do a slight roll down for trying to find just some acceptable board, that is perfectly okay, especially if you already have most of the 7 units that you're looking to play, you can do that as well. However, most of the time you do not have enough gold to level to 7 and roll on 3-5 without griefing the rest of your game. So usually this is only the case if you lose streak all the way into 3-5 and you're forced to go all in on 3-5. So realistically, most of the time you're going to stay level 6 until 3-5. Sometimes you'll be able to go to level 7 and stay above 30 gold, and that's good, without rolling at all. And in other instances, maybe you'll just have to stay level 6 going into Stage 4. Stage 4 is the moment that you've been waiting for, because you can finally force the perfect level 7 board, especially if you've been holding on to these units the whole game. On 3-7, you're going to sell your headliner if it's not Misfortune or Bard, and then you're going to level to 7 on 4-1 and roll for exactly this board. I highly recommend that you put all 7 of these units into your team planner. It will mark them in your shops and make it a lot less likely that you miss any of these units. You're going to stop rolling once you hit a 2-star tank, so that can be Ekko or Nico. I will say that I think Ekko is slightly stronger. And then you want a 2-star Misfortune with either Headliner Misfortune or Bard. Now, the reason I clarify that you want 2-star Misfortune regardless is if you find Headliner Bard first, you're probably going to want to continue rolling until you're able to find Misfortune 2, especially if you have her paired. If you find Headliner Misfortune, though, you're not always going to have to keep rolling for Bard 2, because usually Misfortune 2 with a 2-star tank is enough to be stable in Stage 4. Now, Misfortune Headliner is stronger than Bard Headliner, but there are a couple of different reasons why you don't want to greed for it. The first thing is that usually you just don't have enough gold, even if you are uncontested, to guarantee that you're going to be able to find Misfortune Headliner. But if you are contested, number one, there is a small chance that you cannot find Misfortune as your headliner. Once there are 9 Misfortunes out of the pool, she will no longer show up as a headliner in your shops. That's one of the mechanics of set 10. And then also, because other people are taking them out of the pool, it's less likely you see her as a headliner, even if she can show up. So usually you're just going to take whichever one shows up first. Let's talk about contesting, because it's very important to understand how to play when contested. This is not like any of the other guides I've done before where initially the comp was uncontested until I made the guide. This comp is already heavily contested, so you need to understand how to play around other people playing the comp. The first thing to understand is that this board is very stable with 2-star units. So really, you just need 2-star Misfortune. You do not need to get Misfortune 3 in order to top 4 with this board. So if you see that you're contested and it's unlikely that you're going to be able to hit Misfortune 3, your goal after hitting this board and having a 2-star tank with 2-star Misfortune is to save your gold and start pushing levels. If you find that you are uncontested, you can roll on level 7 for Bard 3 and Misfortune 3. The other thing of note here is that if you are contested and you are rich, for example, let's say you were able to hit this board with very little gold invested on 4-1, you might be able to go to level 8 on 4-2 or 4-5 and start trying to get stronger by just putting additional units on your board. We'll talk about that more in the Stage 5 portion of this guide. The main thing of note here is that you do not want to roll on level 7 after you hit this whole board if you see that you're contested and it's unlikely that you're going to be able to hit Misfortune 3 or Bard 3. All of the decisions that are made in Stage 5 are informed by whether or not you're going for Bard 3, Misfortune 3, both, or neither. So let's go through each of those cases. If you are rolling for Bard 3, and you should only do this if you have Headliner Bard, then you can stay level 7 in Stage 5 and roll for the Bard. Now, there are a couple of different circumstances or factors that apply here in terms of whether to dig on 5-1, 5-2, or 5-5. Really what this comes down to is how many bards you have, how much gold you have, how stable is your board, how strong are other boards in the lobby, and how healthy you are. Maybe I said that last one twice. But the main goal here is you're looking to hit Bard 3 at some point in Stage 5, and then be able to push to level 8 on 5-2 or 5-5. If you're not able to meet both of those conditions, usually you're going to fall behind if you are not able to find this Bard 3 early enough. If you're rolling for Misfortune 3, then most of the time I recommend pushing to level 8, because there are a lot of different 5 costs that you can play on your board on level 8 that make you a lot stronger. So yes, you may have to invest a lot of gold into this, but if you stay level 7, you're all in on the idea of being able to hit this Misfortune 3, whereas if you go level 8, you have 1% higher odds of 3 costs. Really, it's negligible, but the important part is you get much higher odds of finding 5 costs, and there are 6 different 5 costs that you can add to your board on level 8. So again, generally speaking, if you're rolling for Misfortune 3, I recommend going level 8. And of course, if you're not rolling for Misfortune or Bard, you should always be going level 8 in Stage 5 on 5-1 or 5-2. Now, whether you go on 5-1 or 5-2 really just depends on how much gold you have. Most of the time it's on 5-1, but if you're really poor or if you're really healthy and can afford to greed, you can do it on 5-2. Now, let's talk about the different units that you can add to your board here. The best unit that you can add to your board is a Ziggs, because he provides Hyper Pop plus Dazzler. And if you're not playing around Headliner Bard, you can sell your Bard and put a replacement Bard on the board, and then move these items over to the Ziggs, which is very strong since Ziggs is actually the strongest carry in the game right now. Outside of Ziggs, you can add a Lucian to your board, which provides 3 Jazz. You can also add an Alawi to your board, even though she doesn't provide any synergies. She's just generally speaking the most frontline in the game. You can also add a Jhin to your backline. He is one of the best carries in the game as well. He's also a big shot, so he gets that synergy from your Misfortune and Kaisa. You can also add a Sona. Attack speed Sona is probably the best one that you can play here since it's very good with Misfortune. And then you can also play a Yorick in the front line as a Guardian. That just provides a lot of additional value to your team. Yorick is even more valuable if you do not have Last Whisper or Even Shroud, since his ghouls will sunder enemies and make your Misfortune do a lot more damage. Now, outside of the 5 costs, you can also consider adding a Thresh to your board. You can add an Amumu to your board. You can add a Dazzler to your board like Twisted Fate or Lux. And then you can also add a Lulu to your board, which is Hyper Pop, and just generally provides utility to your board. So there's a lot of different options here for what to play on 8. Most of the time, because you're rolling down on 4-1, you're not going to be able to go level 9 here. I'm going to have a separate section here where I talk about how you're going to play around going level 9 and how to eventually cap your board. That's coming up. All right, you have made it to the late game, and you're really curious now. How am I supposed to cap this comp? Surely I'm not supposed to have a Lilia on my board or a Kennen or a Kaisa. How am I supposed to make this transition though? Because it seems really overwhelming. So let me kind of break this down for you. The first thing to understand here is that this is important to know about regardless of whether you're playing around Kaisa or Misfortune 2 or Misfortune 3, because this can make the difference between going 3rd or 1st. There is a standard level 9 board that you're always going to want to target. Now, you're not always going to be able to get there, but let me show you what that board looks like, and then we'll go from there. So the ideal level 9 board that you always want to play is going to be dropping out of a lot of units here. So we're going to drop out of the Kaisa, the Kennen, the Lilia, the Ekko, and the Nico. We're then going to add a bunch of different 5 costs to the board. So we have Ziggs, we have Jhin, we have Alawi, we have Yorick, and then you can also play Lucian, but we'll leave him to last. Then you want to add a Thresh and a Set. Okay, now this is the ideal 8 units. You get a lot of Jazz value, and then you can decide how you want to fill out the rest of the board. Usually it's going to be something like a Lucian here for 3 Jazz. You can add another 5 cost with Sona. You can also consider just having more frontline. So you can have duplicates of certain units. For example, you can have 2 Threshes. You can play a Zac on your board. You can play a lot of different things in these spots, but the main thing to understand is that you're eventually looking to play these exact 8 units, and then you can move the Shojin over to Jhin or to Ziggs. You can move your Adaptive Helm over to Ziggs or Jhin, whichever one you're able to hit first. Just keep in mind here that Ziggs is the best AP carry in the game and Jhin is the best AD carry in the game. So your AD items can go onto Jhin, but you can also put mana gen items onto Jhin as well if you hit 2-star Jhin before 2-star Ziggs, and that's perfectly acceptable as well. But really what you're looking to do here is you're looking to play these 4 units in your front line and then these 4 units in your back line, and then you can fill out the rest of the comp however you see fit. Now, something I've seen done quite often is you're actually going to drop out of this Yorick and this Thresh and play some alternative 2 frontline combo. So something that's very common here is to actually play Ekko plus Mordekaiser, because you'll notice from before that we had to sell almost our entire board, and most of the time you're not going to have enough gold to make that transition. So something you can do instead is keep your Ekko here and then play around another Sentinel. It could be Mordekaiser, it can be Blitzcrank as well, depending on whichever one you're able to 2-star, and then you still want to play that Alawi plus Set, or in this case Zac is better. And then the back line is still going to be roughly the same. And again, you can fill out this comp with any 9th unit that you want to. Often it's going to be something like a Lucian for 3 Jazz, but in this particular board's case, you might want to consider another frontline unit. So there is a lot of different options here for how you're going to cap out the board, but the big thing here is you really want to have this exact level 9 board memorized. I'll show it one more time. So you're going to have Alawi in the front line. You're also going to combine that with a Set, a Yorick, and a Thresh. And then in the back line here, you're going to play these 4 units. and then you can add a Lucian or whatever 5 cost you want to. It can also be a Sona as well. This right here is the board that I cap around the overwhelming majority of the time when I play this comp. Regardless of whether or not I'm playing 2-star or 3-star MF, I always try to aim for this board. So this is how you eventually get out of the Superfans. Making this transition is very daunting. It requires a lot of gold, requires you to have tempoed early in the game. But if you're able to get here, the overwhelming majority of the time, you're going to win. Let's talk about augments. Of course, at the very top here, the very best augment that you can get for this comp is 10's Jazz, baby. This is the strongest augment to ever get added to the game of TFT. It's not even close. It has the highest sample size, the best average placement, the highest win rate. This augment is completely absurd. It's going to get fixed at some point here. Enjoy it while you can. Always take it if it gets offered. Bigger Shot is also completely broken here. So this is another augment that pretty much no matter what, you're always going to take. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sort these augments by average placement. This will give you an idea of the best augments for this comp. The only caveat that I want to add to this is that keep in mind the sample size here when it comes to the number of games. If there is a low number of games, it may not actually be a broken augment. And now I'm going to scroll through this list here, and you can slow down the video if you want to get an idea of all of the different augments that you can pick with the comp if you are in the middle of your game. I highly recommend using tactic.tools, which is where I'm currently at, in order to pull up lists like this to get an idea of the best augments. Hopefully that's able to help you out. All right, let's quickly go through the different Ornn items here. The big thing of note is that Gambler's Blade is very strong on Misfortune. If you get offered Lucky Streak on 2-1 and maybe even 3-2 if you have the Misfortune already, it is very strong. It's basically a replacement for Rage Blade and is going to farm you a lot of gold throughout the course of the game. Outside of that, you're mostly looking for tank items here. So Infinity Force, Anima Visage, Eternal Winter, Diamond Hands, Hull Crusher, Mogul Mail. These are all things that you're going to be putting onto your Ekko or your Nico. So for the most part, if you get Portable Forge here, if you get the Artifact Anvil from the portal, you're going to be looking for a tank item if it's not Gambler's Blade. Even Sniper's Focus is not that strong here. You can also consider maybe Gold Collector on Misfortune, but truth be told, generally speaking, when you're getting these artifacts, you are looking to get one that you can put onto Ekko, with the exception of Gambler's Blade. For support items here, you're really looking for these attack speed-based support items. So that's your Zeke's Herald, your Aegis of the Legion, as well as any of the row buffs. So Zeke's Herald and Chalice of Power are both very strong. Usually you're going to have Kai'Sa as your item holder here. That's why I have Kai'Sa shown in the filters here where I didn't before, because usually she's going to be the unit that you want to put these support items on. Also, Zephyr is very strong, gives attack speed buff, and just generally speaking is pretty good. I'm surprised that Banshee's Veil is not very good, but the sample size is relatively low. Maybe as the sample size goes up, we might see this item improve, but there are your different support items. Lastly, let's talk about Radiant items. I've sorted this by delta with a minimum sample size of 100, and what you'll see is there's not actually that many Radiant items based on how many there are total that have negative delta. In fact, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different Radiant items that have negative delta. So I highly recommend that you do not take augments that give you a Radiant item and not vote for portals that give you a Radiant item either. At the top, we have Radiant Guinsoo's for MF, Radiant DB for MF as well, and then we have Jaxos for Bard. Then there's a huge fall off here for GS, Hodge, IE, Last Whisper, and Rascal's Gloves on Ekko, and then everything else is positive delta. Now, of course, there's going to be Radiant items that are very good on 5 cost if you're able to get to that part of the game, but if you're just focused on the core comp, there is not a lot of good Radiant items, and generally speaking, you should not focus on them. And that's it for this guide on Superfan Jazz. This is one of the strongest comps in the game. I would say it is the strongest comp right now. It probably will get nerfed after this video gets uploaded at some point, so make sure you check the pinned comment to see updates in terms of how they've changed the game. And then lastly, I want to note that I am competing in the Box tournament, so check out my stream if you're interested in watching me compete against some of the best players in the world for who can get the highest rank by December 4th. And if that's outdated by the time you watch this video, hopefully I did well. I'll see you next time.